Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Thank you for coming out this evening, and a pretty autumnal evening. That you've all made it, and it's fully sold out, and the doors are closed. So I'm going to basically introduce Patrick. I understand most of you know who he is. Many of you are friends, and you're Patrick. Why don't you explain a little bit about what this book is all about? Because it's not the travelogue that you used to write. And I have many questions, but you go ahead and explain specifically what this book is about.
Well, my first book, In Search of Reports from Beyond, was really a book about my travels. And my second book, In Search of Landfall, was really about my inner journey and more about me personally. But this book is about neither of those, but it's a mixture between the two of them. It's not a memoir, it's not a biography, and it's not a travelogue. But it's about how, over the years, when I started going to this lovely little town called Göttingen in Germany to see my partner's father, Otto, who was a wonderful man who became like my second father. When I went to Göttingen, I discovered in this beautiful little town full of black and white Fachwerkhäuser, they're called, black and white houses, I discovered that Göttingen University was famous, believe it or not, for having links to or laureates of 45 Nobel Prize winners. So Oxford and Cambridge, eat your heart out. Although very few people have ever heard of Göttingen in Britain, and almost nobody has heard of the university, which was the Georg August University. So the book started when I went every year to visit Otto, my wonderful father-in-law. Although he wasn't like a father-in-law to me, it was a different relationship. When I started going there, if Gabriella was talking to Otto, I would venture off, as I often do, down to the main street, and slowly over time I began to realize that the main street was lined by what's called Gedenktafel, which are actually plaques. And over the time I began to realize that I had a relationship with the people to whom these were Gedenktafels, but I'll call them plaques. Now, they're all dead people. They were all ranging from the 18th. Of the 17 different people that I have chosen, 16 of them all went to the Georg August University. So the book is about those 17 people, but it's also about 4 other people who were very famous German travelers and explorers who were very well known and very famous in their own right for their travels to, for example, the fabled Yemen in the 18th century, or to Timbuktu in the 19th century, or to Tibet in the 20th century. And I found myself sometimes literally in their footsteps, not by design. I didn't set out to go and follow in their footsteps, but I found myself doing that. So the book is about 17 of these 17 people and my relationship to them, where I met them, how I came across them. Sometimes it was in South America, sometimes it was in the Silk Road in China, sometimes it was the Yemen, and sometimes in Timbuktu. And there I found myself coming across these people. Now, I would like to say that the reason why I loved doing this book was because I loved doing the research. And COVID was very good to me because it meant I had to stay at home for 3 years. And I spent those 3 years researching the book. And the more I found about these people who I had links with, and I have to stress they're albeit quite tenuous links sometimes, but the book is my opportunity to talk about these people, talk about my links to them, even if they're tenuous, and to bring to a British audience who these people are. Now, some of you may have heard of some of them, but you may not have heard of the facts about their personal lives, which I researched in Göttingen, a lot of which are quite entertaining and a lot of which are quite very interesting. So that's, but it's also because I wanted to, as I say, bring to a British audience either people you may know of, like, for example, Captain Cook, who had a relationship with Georg August University, although he was the only one who didn't go to Georg August University. But whether it was Captain Cook, or whether it was the Grimm brothers, or whether it was Oppenheimer, or whoever it was, they all... Now, we've probably all heard about Oppenheimer now because of the film. Everybody knows about Oppenheimer. But I wrote this book before Oppenheimer came out. But he's done me a wonderful amount of publicity because nearly everybody has seen the book. And I just happened to see him in Germany, and I was very privileged to go and see the film with my lovely partner, Gabriella, in Göttingen, where the film was being shown to a whole bunch of Göttingen students at Göttingen University, the Georg August University, where Oppenheimer had studied. So that's roughly how the evening's going to progress.
Patrick opens up the book with his father-in-law. And then as you read into the book, in the middle of the book, once again, he's discussing his father-in-law. And he also closes the book with his father-in-law. So that told me an awful lot of things, and you read about it in there. There's a great, very deep affection, a lot of love, a lot of very deep respect, loyalty. And so maybe you can tell us a little bit about Otto, because he is a main character. He's not one of the 17 substance, but he's certainly,
That's right.
I would say, a third of the book, almost.
Right,
Yeah.
Well, without my lovely partner, Gabriella, who is here tonight, I would not have written this book, because I would not have gone to Göttingen and I would never have met Otto. And it was going to Göttingen to meet Otto that started the whole thing off. And it was really Otto who inspired me to write this book. And Otto was a doctor. And Otto was just an exemplary human being, and the sort of doctor that anybody would want to have. You could Google the adjectives that you would like to use about him, and they all fit. Calm, phlegmatic, sympathetic, empathetic, interesting. I just got on incredibly well with Otto, and in all of the 30 years I knew him, I never, ever had an unpleasant word with him. And Otto became like a second father to me. So I have an immense debt and gratitude to Otto, and Otto's spirit is here tonight.
Tell him, explain where your love for Germany and your mum's, a little bit of your mum's sort of dabbling in the German experience, if I could put it that way.
The more I went to Germany, as a travel writer, the part of Germany where Göttingen is a completely unknown part of the world for British people, which is so unjust, because the little towns round about Göttingen, whether it's Goslar or whether it's Quedlinburg or wherever it was, each of these towns has got more Fachwerkhäuser, which is black and white, beautiful half-timbered houses. Each of these towns has probably got more Fachwerkhäuser than the whole of Britain put together. And whether that's York or whether it's wherever it is, these are exquisite towns. They're really beautiful towns. So I enjoyed travelling round Göttingen, and I loved Göttingen. And the more I went there, the more I discovered that I love German culture as well. And it's a shame that Germany is not on the map for most British people, because it deserves very much to be explored. And a lot in the book is about Germany, not just because it's interesting, not just because it's important, it's a nice place to visit, but Britain's relationship with Germany has basically been what has determined our relationship for the last 200 years or 150 years since Bismarck. I mean, we've fought 2 world wars with them. First World War, Second World War, and now here once again is Germany, the dominant partner in Europe. But because of the way our Anglo-American culture looks towards America instead of Europe, and the whole Brexit business, that if you say to somebody, if I say to somebody, I've just come back from Germany and Greece, they say, how was Greece? But they won't talk about Germany. And it's really a shame because Germany has got so much to offer for
I've
it.
travelled a fair amount in Germany. Sounds absolutely fantastic. So I've now figured out I've got friends in Wiesbaden and they can put me up and I'll take a train up to this little town and visit the university. Because it's a fascinating book, and these individuals change history.
Well, I didn't answer your question about my family and my relationship to Germany.
Yeah, it's quite funny.
Very briefly, because my mother was very large when she was a child, and when she was at convent, people used to call her Steffi, after the German airship, the Graf Zeppelin.
Zeffie.
They used to call her that. And then when she was married to my father in Sussex, the family history had it was that during the Second World War, there was a German prisoner of war camp not far away, and my mother met one of the German prisoners of war on this free prisoner of war camp, and the story had it was that she went down to Brighton for the day with this German prisoner of war.
After she sold some family heirloom
after she
for
sold
the ticket.
a family heirloom for a ticket. But I'm sure this story is fictitious, or it's not the case, because I look like my father and my sister looks like my mother.
There's a lighter side to the book, because that can be quite heavy. It's incredibly well documented. It's incredible the research you put into it, each individual. And yeah, sure, some of them get slightly more book space than others, but it tells a story of each individual, where they came from, who they were, their network, their financial resources, aristocracy. Like you say, most of them, all of them male, many of them white, not a great deal of difference, or just privileged people, and it's great to read about them. But there's also a lighter side, and that's your link, because like you say, you have these links. Some of them are just almost crossing paths. Others are family links. Many are traveling links, and I found your links were almost like a light to the Pinot Noir to the Cabernet of the substance of this book. So I loved reading about the individuals, but I also got a real laugh out of some of the links.
Yeah.
And
Nigel's a great cook and a wine connoisseur.
Yeah, a private chef in my past. You tell us a couple of links. I mean, if you look at Oppenheimer, the link there, is you going to to CND, your future.
Okay,
excitement.
A couple of links. Well, the first link was to Alexander von Humboldt.
Yeah.
The link with Alexander von Humboldt was that when I was at school, I in my geography class when I was 15, at the end of one class, or just towards the end of it, he mentioned he was rambling away about South America, and I didn't know what he was talking about. I wasn't listening, and he happened to mention the Humboldt Current, followed by the word Chimborazo. And I didn't know what either the Humboldt current was or what Chimborazo was. So after the class, I went up to him and said, "Sir, can you tell me what Humboldt is?" And he said, "Humboldt is the name of the the current off the south coast of South America or Chile." And I said to him, "Sir, I thought that was a current, not a raisin, not a current." And he said, "No, it's a cold water current off South America." And I said, "Chimborazo, what is Chimborazo? Is that some kind of chimpanzee?" And he said, "No, it's a volcano of Ecuador." So that was the beginning of my link, because when I set off to travel through South America, one evening I was on this monstrous milk truck, and it was the only truck that had come along all day on the Pan American Highway, which was completely deserted. And then the only truck that came along and picked me up. And that evening, we were going down the Pan American Highway, and I thought to myself, you know, it would be really romantic to get off and spend the night by the side of a deserted beach in overlooking the Pacific. So I did, and I got off, and I slept the night there, and I'll always remember that night. It was just a wonderful night, one of the best nights in the whole journey, where the sky was just absolutely one of the most beautiful skies I've ever seen, and the desert, the Atacama Desert, was stretching away to the Himalayas, and the thundering pounding of the huge waves on the beach, and I thought, this is just wonderful. But that night I couldn't sleep a wink because it was freezing. And in the morning I woke up and I realized that this was because of the Humboldt current. And my mind went all the way back to my geography teacher. And later that time, a month later or 2 weeks later, I then set off, like Humboldt, I set off to go up through Ecuador. Now, Humboldt had gone to Ecuador to climb Chimborazo, the volcano. And at that time, Chimborazo was the highest known mountain in the world, at 20,000 feet. And if you look it up on the internet, some internet sources say that it's actually still the biggest mountain in the world from its base on the sea to 20,000 feet. And so anyway, I was really looking forward to seeing Chimborazo because my mind was going back to my geography teacher. And then you can imagine my disappointment when I got to the Avenida del Volcanos, which is where the volcano was, to find the whole thing was completely covered with mist. Couldn't see a thing. So I did actually see it. A few hours later, the mist lifted, and I saw Chimborazo, which was this beautiful volcanic volcano like this. And Humboldt had gone to Chimborazo and when he went to Chimborazo and when he went to South America, Humboldt started measuring things. He measured the color of the sky. He measured the temperature of lightning flashes. He measured the weight of hoar frosts at night. He measured the wings of condors. And he was an extraordinary man, and he became one of the world's first great, he was the world's first environmentalist. And it was his relationship to, and what he did in South America. For example, this is a photograph of Chimborazo, and when he climbed it, he became the first person on Earth first European, to get within 400 feet of the top of it. But while he climbed, he measured everything. He measured the valley of the lichens. He measured the valley of the gentians. He everything. And he measured the precipitation, he measured the temperature, in everything in this. And it was an Alexander von Humboldt who then, as I say, began to link everything together and make an interconnection. And Humboldt was really the inventor of the concept of nature. Alexander von Humboldt then went on. He met Jefferson. After he returned from South America, he wasn't finished with his traveling. At the age of 60, he set off from St. Petersburg to travel to the Himalayas to make a comparison between the Himalayas and the Andes, and he traveled 12,000 miles with Cossacks, and he stopped at 658 post stops to change horses, and he rode 12,500 horses. Now you may find that a surprising statistic, because that was a 6 months. And I thought to myself when I went over the book, and I thought to myself, you know, perhaps somebody tonight's going to pick up on me and say, Patrick, you can't possibly have done that. I mean, we worked out how many horses is that per week or something. And I worked it out, and it's actually 70 horses per day. But that's what he did. He went through 70 horses a day, riding with Cossacks on a 12,000-mile journey. And then he came back, and I'll finish soon.
No, not at all. He was financed by Spain, though, wasn't he? Was he not? He went to Spain to get the money to do this.
There you have me.
Yeah.
Not that I know of, but never mind.
Yeah, I thought I read that he went to Spain.
But just to finish that, Humboldt then went off, and as I say, he became the first environmentalist in Europe, and he gave his name to more places on Earth than anybody else, as far as I know, apart from Marx. He gave his name to mountains in Kazakhstan, in Kyrgyzstan, in the Antarctic, in New Caledonia, in New Guinea. He gave his name to universities, although Humboldt University in Berlin is his brother. But he gave his name to institutes, to towns, 8 towns. He gave his name to 100 animal species. He gave his name to 300 plant species. And now he's completely unknown in Britain.
Yeah, no one knows who he is, really.
Nobody knows who he is.
Yeah.
I fell in love with Hiawatha, the story of it, the poem of it. And I can still remember it to this day. And it goes as follows. By the shore of Gitchigumi, by the shining big sea water, at the doorway of his wigwam, in the sunny, pleasant morning, Hiawatha stood and waited. All the air was full of freshness. All the earth was bright and joyous. And before him, through the sunshine, westwards, towards the neighbouring forest, past the golden swarm of the amu, the bees, the honey makers, burning, singing in the sunshine. Always remember that. Chapter 22nd of Hiawatha. It was in reading that book which made me realise for the first time how much I sympathised with the Indians instead of the
cavalry.
The cavalry.
The US cavalry.
And in the 1970s they started showing these films with John Wayne, like Red River and various other films. And I can remember seeing his face, which I thought at the time was very harsh and cruel. And I can remember seeing his face and reading about he massacred the Indians when in Red River, for example, or how I identified also with the Red Indians as they fought with their bows and arrows against the Winchester rifles, the sophisticated rifles of the cavalry. And I dare say it was that time when I first began to feel that I always identify with the other. I've always identified with the other, whether it's runaways or whether it's outcasts or whatever it is, or whether it's underprivileged people or whether it's working class people or inequality or whatever it is. I mean, I've always identified with them. And I've spent a lot of my life going to places where I explored traditional cultures where people were oppressed and so on. And I dare say that comes on to my relationship with CND as well, which we may get to later on. Can I just come back briefly to Longfellow, because at a certain stage, Longfellow, who wrote Hiawatha, at a certain stage, Longfellow was the most famous poet in the Anglo-American speaking world. And Longfellow, when he came over to Britain, he was received by Queen Victoria at Buckingham Palace. He was received by the Prince of Wales. He met Gladstone, he met Carlyle, he met Disraeli. When he went to America, he entertained Oscar Wilde, he entertained Sarah Bernhardt, the actress, and he was the first poet non-American, who had a statue to him in Poets' Corner in Westminster Abbey. But now, Longfellow is completely forgotten. Nobody talks about Longfellow anymore. So I just mentioned that as the wonderful story behind people like this. People who are completely forgotten and we don't talk about it anymore. And that's one of the reasons that I like talking about them, because we could talk about Bismarck, who's in the book, or we could talk about Coleridge, who's in the book, or whatever. But in the book there are people some of whom are very interesting but are not very well known.
One of the questions I had for you was, you've got these 16, 17 individuals, and who do you identify with as an individual? Who out of them all, do you have a favourite?
It would be Captain Cook.
And why? Because of travel? Or?
Because Captain Cook was a Scotsman. He was the son of a lowly Scottish farmer, if I remember correctly. Captain Cook, that's right, yeah. And he became a very compassionate man, and his crews loved him, but he was an incredible explorer. I mean, he travelled, the distances that he clocked up were just astronomical. And one person, and it was through I have always loved water. I'm a water baby. It was my love of water that made me want to go to the South Pacific. And I completely fell in love with the South Pacific. And on two separate occasions, I went across the South Pacific 3 months at a time. The first time from Tahiti to the Republic of Kiribati to the Cook Islands. The second time from Vanuatu to Tonga to the Solomon Islands. And everywhere I went, I felt the spirit of Captain Cook, because Captain Cook had been there. And the chapter in the book about Captain Cook ends up with me going on a beach in Vanuatu, in an island in southern Vanuatu, where I had went to explore a very strange cargo cult. And a cargo cult is indigenous people, impoverished indigenous people, who want foreigners to bring cargo, which is wealth, with them, and pray for these foreigners to bring it with them. So I went anyway to investigate this cargo cult. And Captain Cook arrived at the north of this island and then sailed south, and then dropped anchor in Port Resolution, a tiny little bay in Vanuatu. And when I went to the main village in Tanna, I was sitting on a beach there. in this incredibly impoverished village with sodden huts and with children kicking, half-naked children kicking an old tin can around, and a totally naked old woman sitting on a volcanic beach by the image, by the skeleton of a outrigger canoe staring sadly out to sea, I suddenly realized that I was standing just a stone's throw from where Captain Cook had arrived and in his ship HMS Resolution and moored in Port Resolution. And when Captain Cook arrived at that bay, he went ashore, and originally he had a pretty rough reception, but afterwards he went ashore and he met the local chieftain called Powawang, and he couldn't, of course they couldn't speak language, and Captain Cook pointed to the earth, meaning to ask Powawang, the chieftain, what the name of the island was. And the chieftain, Powawang, thought that Captain Cook was asking him what the name of the earth is in the local language, so he replied, Tanna. And that's why the village is called Tanna. And that's where I was standing, at the very southern part of Tanna, on the point where Captain Cook had landed. Anyway, I'd like to read this so that there's time for questioning if anybody wants to have questions. And I've chosen this because there's an Edinburgh link here. And there's a link to some people here who are part of all of the story. Before I talk about Oppenheimer, I knew who he was. I knew that he was the man who had been in charge of the Manhattan Project in the Second World War, an American project to build a bomb before the Germans built it. I knew that when the bomb had gone off in Hiroshima, he had said, "It works." And then I also knew that afterwards, on retrospect, he also said to himself famously, when he thought about it, the words from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita, came to him, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." And Oppenheimer began to regret what he had done, although he always maintained that it was correct, that it had been used. But when the second bomb went off after Nagasaki, he then became very disillusioned. So I knew all of this before I discovered his plaque, one of the 17 plaques in Göttingen. I knew all of this before, but what I didn't know was that he too had studied at the Georg August University. Okay. In the early years of the 19th century, the university had reached the height of its fame when it became, arguably, the world's centre for mathematics and physics. And it was this reputation for the latter that lured the 22-year-old Oppenheimer to Göttingen. In 1926, he arrived to study for his PhD under Max Born, and please remember the name Max Born, who at the time was the head of the Institute for Theoretical Physics. In 1927, Göttingen was still a small academic town, not dissimilar to a German Cambridge except for its hills. Here, socially, Oppenheimer blossomed. At Cambridge and Harvard, he'd been an outsider, but now, for the first time in his life, he relished the company of his contemporaries. He also flourished academically in Born's Department of Theoretical Physics, where he was regarded as a brilliant, if arrogant, PhD student. He published more than a dozen articles, and he made scores of vital contributions to the newly developed theory of quantum mechanics. At the same time, he contradicted everybody and anyone in the seminars, where he was notorious for marching up to the blackboard to correct someone's error before he scrawled a corrected proof. This so irked some students that they presented Bourne with a petition threatening to boycott his class unless he made Oppenheimer moderate his conduct. Even though Bourne, who won the Nobel Prize for Physics in 1952, was one of the world's most celebrated theoretical physicists, Bourne was a self-deprecating man who also felt intimidated by Oppenheimer. So, rather than confront him directly, Bourne left a note on his desk for Oppenheimer to find. Oppenheimer read it, did as the students requested, and nobody complained again. But on another occasion, Bourne asked Oppenheimer and a number of other PhD students to check Bourne's maths, which Bourne himself admitted could periodically be faulty. After they did so, Oppenheimer had the nerve to comment, "I can't find any mistakes. Are you sure you did this yourself?" Despite profoundly admiring Oppenheimer's brilliance, Bourne was mightily relieved when Oppenheimer left Göttingen. "I've never suffered as much with anybody as him," he wrote. "He's paralysed all of us for 3/4 of a year." He wasn't the only one to find Oppenheimer exasperating. In 1927, Oppenheimer obtained his PhD, aged just 23, and after the oral exam, James Franck, the administering professor, exclaimed, "I'm glad that's over. He was on the point of questioning me." Oppenheimer was fortunate to have studied at Göttingen when he did in 1927, because in 1933, the Nazis introduced the law for the restoration of the professional service, civil service, in Germany, which made it illegal for any non-Aryan, especially Jews, to teach or as a professor. So Max Born, the head of the Department of Theoretical Physics, left, and in 1936 he came to Edinburgh University, where he was made at the head of theoretical physics from 1936 to 1952. It was during the course of that year that I first found myself conscious of just how perilous a place the world was becoming. With the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Cold War was reaching boiling point, and in a dummy run for a possible war with the United States and the Soviet Union, our school had been evacuated to its new underground bunkers. Horrified at the prospect of a nuclear Armageddon, I had gone on a C&D march to Aldermaston, which was only the start of my involvement with the peace movement, because when I came back from Amsterdam in 1983, I joined a tightly knit, very motivated C&D group. This consisted overwhelmingly of lawyers, artists and writers, which included Jim, a retired physics teacher, who was very cerebral, and he practically lived in the National Library carrying out his research. And as one of his main interests was the history and development of nuclear weapons, it was through him that I learnt much of what I knew about Oppenheimer. But I had another link, no matter how indirect, to Oppenheimer, the father of the bomb. In Edinburgh, every week the C&D group assembled in the nearby Georgian house of the ex-wife of Peter Higgs, at that time a little-known middle-aged academic who, in 1960, no doubt attracted by its reputation under Bourne, had been made a lecturer in physics at the Department of Physics in Edinburgh, where Jim had studied. This was only 8 years after the retirement of Born, under whom Oppenheimer had studied in Göttingen. And in 1980, Peter was promoted to a personal chair of theoretical physics. Although he no longer lived with his wife, his ex-wife, or attended the CND meetings, both of them were vehemently opposed to nuclear weapons. Peter, who still lived quietly a short distance away, remained close to his wife, and every now and again I ran into them during the Edinburgh International Festival. Peter was an exceptionally humble man, and even though by now he had been garlanded with prestigious honours for his work in physics, I also bumped into him when he was waiting patiently at the local bus stop in Stockbridge, when I would stop and have a brief conversation with him. Meanwhile, thousands and thousands of physicists the world over were searching for an elusive particle is suspected of being one of the fundamental components of the very fabric of the universe. And at last, in 2012, it was located by the Large Hadron Collider at CERN, the European Organization for Nuclear Research, and named the Higgs boson after Peter, who had predicted its existence as early as 1964. The discovery of the so-called God particle, a misleading label which Peter detested, caused an utter sensation in the scientific community as well as the media. Then, in 2013, on the recommendation of Stephen Hawking, a media world frenzy, in the middle of a media world frenzy, Peter Higgs was awarded the Nobel Prize for Physics and became, I believe it's true to say, almost as famous as Oppenheimer. That was my link. From Max Born to Oppenheimer to Peter Higgs to Stockbridge CND, and that was my link.
Yeah, we should.
I was interested to be watching University Challenge recently, and none of the students on that episode knew of the Humboldt current because they answered incorrectly. So even current students don't know who Humboldt was. Just a comment.
Thank you, Steve.
Given that your prior books were travelogues and they took personal memoirs of all these places you went, and they were obscure places, they weren't Disney Orlando, they were way up in Tibet and, like you say, Vanuatu. I guess the travel side of it is done by these individuals in this book. You know, you were in one place for one time in this little university town. How does that differ, writing about that, rather than your past many, many places that you visited? Do you miss the travel side of it, or is it just been there, done that? And
Well, the thing that I liked about doing this book is that in some ways it's, I mean, I'm a bit of an old war horse now, and I'm quite happily falling apart physically. I'm not sure that I could do any of these journeys anymore. But what I do like very much is that in this book, I'm now integrating my life, these journeys in my life, and I'm spending time thinking about them. And I'm also thinking about the people who inspired me to do these. And they have led me to appreciate and to find more about people who I myself didn't know a lot of this before I went out. When I went and I crossed paths with various people, I mean, when I was in Timbuktu, I didn't know very much about Heinrich Barth, who was German, who who went there in 1856. I didn't know of very much about a lot of these people, but it enabled me to find out about them, and I relived, and I have been reliving my travels through these people.
Through them, because
And
they're all
it's-
over.
Yeah, and it makes me quite happy to look back in my life and to reflect and to feel that I've been there and I've done that.
Been there, done that. Time's caught up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm interested to know if the people of Göttingen and the university know about your book, because I'm sure it could be of interest to the people there.
It's a very good question, and when I went over last time, I had a meeting with a person in the tourist office to see if she could give me links to any publisher in Göttingen who might be interested. But A, it would have to be translated, and B, I think it would only be I don't know. I like to think it would be interesting to anybody, not just in Göttingen. And I have thought about approaching two well-known publishers, one in Göttingen, but that publisher is very academic. And secondly, I'm very lazy about promoting myself.
That's
So
one of the questions I had as well. Is it going to be published in German? Because I would,
Absolutely.
yeah. If I was there, I'd want to know about it. There's so much to it. Such an
you.
interesting book,
Thank you.
and I bet that you've done more research than they have. So I thought about that question. That's funny enough. A few other hands went up.
How long does it take you from the inception of the idea, like for this book, for example, from the inception of the idea and then the planning and producing, and to get around to going from then to now?
5 years. It took 3 years to write it, and the writing of it was a joy and a pleasure, but actually getting it published was another story, which had very many challenges in it. But it's out now, and it has got there. So it took me 5 years.
Do you have feelings of regret almost when you finished a book? It's kind of like ending a relationship.
No, I'm really glad that's over. I'm never going to do another one. But I want to thank my lovely partner, Gabriella, here, because without Gabriella, I would not have gone to Germany. I would not got to know Otto, and I would not have gone to Göttingen, and I would not have written this book.